Papa, when people have more than they need, why don't they share with people who have less? The question fell soft as snow in the small kitchen where Thomas Whitfield stood correcting papers, his daughter Rosalind perched at the worn table, her 8-year-old hands carefully stitching fabric scraps into something beautiful. The evening light slanted through their modest apartment, turning everything golden, the chipped teacups, the threadbare rug, the love that held their small world together. Thomas set down his pen, his teacher's heart aching at the wisdom already blooming in his child. That's the question your grandfather spent his whole life trying to answer, sweetheart. Some people forget that money is just paper, but kindness is what makes us human. Rosalind nodded, her fingers never stopping their careful work. She was making small stars, fabric stars stuffed with cotton, each one stitched with different colored thread. Tomorrow she'd sell them for 50 cents each at the corner near school, and whatever she earned would go to Mrs. Patterson down the hall, whose medicine cost more than her pension could cover. In another part of the city, in a glass tower that scraped the sky, Clayton Mercer stood at his office window, phone pressed to his ear, his 4-year-old son Nash asleep on the leather couch behind him. It was nearly midnight again. "I don't care about their circumstances." Clayton's voice was ice. "Production deadlines are non-negotiable. If they can't meet quota, replace them." He ended the call without waiting for a response. Outside, the city glittered like a promise he'd spent 15 years chasing. More wealth, more power, more proof that he'd transcended the softness his mother tried to teach him. His father, Gregory Mercer, had built their textile empire on ruthlessness. Clayton had perfected it. Behind him, Nash stirred, whimpering in his sleep. Clayton's jaw tightened. The boy had his mother's features, the woman who'd left 6 months ago for someone more emotionally available, taking half of Clayton's fortune and all of his remaining faith in human goodness. "Daddy?" Nash's small voice was thick with sleep and fear. Clayton turned, and for just a moment his face softened. "I'm here, buddy. Go back to sleep." But Nash's eyes were already closing, and Clayton wondered if the boy would even remember this moment. Just another night when work mattered more than bedtime stories, when money mattered more than everything. The scholarship that sent Rosalind to Brookshire Academy, one of the state's most prestigious elementary schools, came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Mercer, Clayton's mother and owner of Grandview University where Thomas taught, had noticed the quiet dedication of the literature professor who stayed late helping struggling students, who never complained about his modest salary, who brought the same humble lunch every day so his daughter could have music lessons. "Your father's work ethic is extraordinary," Eleanor had told Rosalind during the interview, her kind eyes seeing past the girl's second-hand dress to the light within. "But I'm giving you this opportunity because I see the same dedication in you. Don't waste it." Rosalind hadn't. But Brookshire Academy was a different world, one where her classmates arrived in cars that cost more than her family earned in 5 years, where birthday parties happened at country clubs, where her patched backpack and handmade lunch drew whispers and sideways glances. Still, Rosalind never complained. At night, she'd tell her mother, Iris, who sewed wedding dresses for wealthy clients while sitting in their tiny living room, about the interesting things she'd learned, not the cruel things she endured. "You have your grandfather's heart," Iris would say, her needle moving in steady rhythm. "He taught in a one-room schoolhouse for 40 years, and he always said the measure of education wasn't what you learned for yourself, but what you did with it to help others." Rosalind understood. That's why every Friday she'd take her small earnings from selling handmade stars and bookmarks, and she'd visit the row of weather-beaten homes near the railroad tracks where families struggled to keep lights on and children fed. She'd buy groceries with her meager funds, delivering them with the same matter-of-fact kindness her parents had modeled. No pity, no fanfare, just human beings helping human beings survive. Nash Mercer started at Brookshire Academy that same autumn his mother left. At 4 years old, he was the youngest in the pre-K class, but Eleanor had insisted, hoping structure might help the boy process his confusion and grief. Nash was quiet at school, watchful, hesitant, as if the world might abandon him again if he made too much noise. During recess, while other children played, he'd sit alone on the bench, clutching a small toy car his mother had given him before she left. Rosalind noticed him during her lunch period. The elementary and pre-K buildings shared a courtyard, and she'd seen the small boy sitting alone day after day, his expression carrying a sadness no 4-year-old should know. One October afternoon, she approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Rosalind. I like your car." Nash looked up, eyes wide and uncertain. My mama gave it to me." Something in his voice, the past tense, the careful pain, made Rosalind's heart ache. She sat beside him, not too close, and pulled out her lunch. Her mother had packed extra today, a peanut butter sandwich cut into triangles, apple slices, and 2 of her homemade cookies. "Are you hungry? My mom always makes too much." Nash hesitated, then nodded. Rosalind handed him half the sandwich and an apple slice. They ate in companionable silence, and when the bell rang, Nash looked at her with something like hope. "Will you sit with me tomorrow?" "Of course," Rosalind said. "That's what friends do." The friendship grew like a seedling in unexpected soil, slowly, quietly, but with surprising strength. Rosalind began spending her lunch periods with Nash, and the little boy started to smile again, started to play, started to remember that the world held warmth alongside its coldness. Clayton noticed the change, but couldn't identify its source. Nash mentioned a friend named Rosalind, but Clayton was too busy expanding into overseas markets to pay much attention. His father, Gregory, approved of the aggressive expansion, and together they pushed their employees harder, cut corners on worker conditions, maximized profit margins with surgical precision. The revelation came on a February morning when everything was covered in fresh snow and the world felt scrubbed clean and new. Nash had been sick, a nasty flu that kept him home for a week. Clayton, juggling conference calls and his son's fever, felt the old frustration rising. Eleanor had offered to help, but Clayton's pride wouldn't allow it. He could manage. He always managed.
On the 3rd day, when Nash's fever finally broke, the boy looked at his father with fever-bright eyes and said, "I miss Rosalind. She makes everything feel safe." Something in those words cracked Clayton's armor. "Who is Rosalind, exactly?" "My friend from school. She shares her lunch with me even though other kids say she's poor. But she's the richest person I know because she's kind to everyone." Clayton's hand stilled on his laptop keyboard. "What do you mean, poor?" Nash explained with a child's simple honesty about Rosalind's patched clothes, her homemade lunch, the way other kids teased her, but she never got mad. "She told me being poor in money doesn't matter if you're rich in kindness. She said her papa taught her that." When Nash returned to school the following Monday, Clayton did something unprecedented. He left work early and came to pick up his son personally, arriving 30 minutes before dismissal. He stood in the courtyard, watching through the fence as children played, and then he saw her, a small girl with dark braids, wearing a coat that had been patched carefully at the elbows, sitting on a bench with Nash. She was showing him something, a small fabric star that caught the winter light. Nash's face was radiant with joy. Clayton moved closer, staying out of sight, and heard their conversation. "I made this one special for you," Rosalind was saying. "See, I used blue thread because you said it's your favorite color, and I put extra stuffing in it so it's really soft." "You made this for me?" Nash's voice was awed. "Friends make things for each other," Rosalind said simply. "Not because they have to, but because it makes their heart happy." Nash hugged the star to his chest, then looked at Rosalind with sudden worry. "But don't you sell these to help people?" "I do, but you're people too, and you needed something special today." Clayton felt something shift in his chest, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd built around his heart. This child, who had so little, had given his son something precious, not from surplus, but from sacrifice. Before he could process the feeling, the dismissal bell rang. Children poured out, and Clayton watched as Rosalind carefully helped Nash put on his backpack, adjusting the straps with the patient care of someone much older. "Mr. Nash's dad!" Rosalind's voice was bright as she noticed Clayton. "You came early!" Clayton found himself walking towards them, his usual commanding presence suddenly uncertain. "You must be Rosalind." She nodded, smiling. "Nash talks about you all the time. He says you work really hard." "I hear you've been very kind to my son," Clayton said carefully. Rosalind looked confused. "He's my friend. That's just what you do." Such simple words, such a simple concept, yet it struck Clayton like a revelation. Kindness given not for advantage or return, but because it was the right thing to do, because it made the heart happy. That evening, instead of returning to his office, Clayton took Nash home, really home, to the penthouse apartment they rarely saw before dark. He ordered pizza instead of having the chef prepare something, and they ate together on the floor, like Nash had wanted to do for months. "Rosalind's papa teaches people to love books, and her mama makes beautiful dresses. She said they don't have much money, but they have lots of love, and that's the most important thing." "Important," Clayton corrected automatically, then stopped. "Did she really say that?" Nash nodded seriously. "She said her grandpa told her papa, and her papa told her, we're only as rich as the love we give away." Clayton sat back, pizza forgotten. He'd spent 15 years building an empire, chasing wealth that kept expanding, but never quite filled the emptiness inside. And here was his 4-year-old son being taught life's essential truths by an 8-year-old girl whose family survived on a teacher's salary and a seamstress's skill. Over the next weeks, Clayton found himself thinking about Rosalind constantly, not the child herself, but what she represented. He began noticing things he'd ignored before, the tired faces of his factory workers, the complaints about unsafe conditions he'd dismissed as exaggeration, and the families struggling because he'd cut benefits to boost quarterly profits. The moment everything changed came in March, unexpected as spring rain. Clayton received a call from Eleanor. Thomas Whitfield had collapsed during a lecture. Heart attack. He was stable now, but the medical bills would be catastrophic, and the family had no insurance beyond the university's basic coverage. "I'm covering it," Eleanor said. "But Clayton, this man has taught at my university for 12 years. He's never asked for a raise, never complained, and now he's facing bankruptcy because he dared to have a heart attack." Something in her voice, not anger, but deep, weary sorrow, cut through Clayton's defenses. "His daughter, Rosalind," she said quietly. "She's the one who's been kind to Nash." "I know,"
Eleanor said. She came to the hospital yesterday, brought her father a fabric star she made, told him it was filled with healing wishes. Then she sold every handmade item she had in the hospital lobby and gave the money, $73, to her mother for medicine. Clayton closed his eyes. $73. To this child, a fortune, given without hesitation. "I'll cover the medical bills," he said, "all of them." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Why?
Because his daughter taught my son that kindness isn't weakness, and maybe it's time I learned that lesson too. But Clayton didn't stop at medical bills. Something had awakened in him. Call it conscience, call it connection, call it the slow realization that his son was learning more about life from an 8-year-old in patched clothes than from his wealthy, distant father. He visited the Whitfield family's modest apartment, ostensibly to check on Thomas's recovery. Iris welcomed him with careful politeness, and Rosalind greeted him with her usual open warmth. "Mr. Nash's dad, did you come to see my papa? He's getting better every day." Thomas was in the small living room, pale but smiling. "Mr. Mercer, I understand we owe you a debt of gratitude." "You owe me nothing," Clayton said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "Your daughter has given my son something I couldn't. She reminded him that the world can be kind." The apartment was tiny, worn, but filled with something Clayton's penthouse lacked: warmth, laughter, the sense that people actually lived there instead of just sleeping between obligations. Rosalind showed him her latest creations: fabric stars in rainbow colors, small bookmarks with pressed flowers, tiny cloth animals. "I'm saving up to buy winter coats for the kids near the railroad tracks," she explained. "They need them more than I need new shoes." Clayton looked at this child, this 8-year-old, who understood sacrifice and service better than most adults he knew, and felt shame wash through him. "What if I helped you with that project?" he said slowly. Rosalind's eyes went wide. "Really? But you're very busy. Nash says you work all the time." "Maybe I've been working on the wrong things," Clayton said softly. What began as a single act of charity became a quiet revolution in Clayton Mercer's life. He started visiting the areas where Rosalind volunteered, seeing firsthand the families struggling in the shadow of his prosperity. He toured his own factories, really looked at the conditions, talked to workers, heard their stories. Gregory was furious. "You're getting soft, just like your mother." "No," Clayton said, his voice steady for perhaps the first time in his father's presence. "Dad, we have everything, and we're miserable. The Whitfields have nothing, and they're filled with joy. Doesn't that tell us something?" But Clayton was done listening to his father's poison. He began implementing changes: better wages, safer conditions, health care benefits. His profit margins shrank, but worker retention improved, productivity increased, and for the first time in years, Clayton felt something like peace. Nash noticed the change most of all. His father came home for dinner now, asked about his day, read bedtime stories, and sometimes on weekends they'd join Rosalind and her parents in volunteering, sorting donations at the food bank, reading to children at the shelter, helping rebuild a home damaged by fire. The final revelation came in May, on a morning soft with possibility and spring flowers. Clayton arrived at Brookshire Academy to pick up Nash and found Rosalind sitting alone on the bench, tears streaming silently down her face. Her usual joy was shattered, replaced by a grief that made her look ancient. "Rosalind?" Clayton sat beside her, his voice gentle. "What happened?" She looked up, tried to smile through her tears. "I'm okay, Mr. Mercer. Just sad today." "Why?" "My best friend Chelsea, she lives near the railroad tracks. Her family's moving away to another state because they can't afford rent anymore." Rosalind wiped her eyes. "I made her a star, a special one, so she'd remember that someone here loved her. But it doesn't feel like enough." Clayton's heart cracked clean through. Here was this child, carrying the weight of the world's suffering on 8-year-old shoulders, believing that her small acts of kindness weren't enough. "Rosalind," he said softly, "can I tell you something I've learned recently?" She nodded, sniffling. "A few months ago, I thought success meant having the most money, the biggest company, the most power. I thought kindness was weakness. But then my son met you, and you taught me, that real wealth is measured in love given, not money earned." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Chelsea's family. What's their last name?" "Henderson, but I'm buying the building where they live, and several others in that neighborhood. No one will be evicted for inability to pay rent. We'll work something out, community service, skills sharing, whatever people can offer, because you taught me that we're only as rich as the love we give away." Rosalind stared at him, then burst into fresh tears, but this time joy mixed with the sorrow. She threw her arms around Clayton in a hug that felt like absolution. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for listening." "No," Clayton said, his own eyes damp. "Thank you for teaching. You saved my son, and probably saved me, too." 6 months later, Clayton stood at a press conference announcing the Whitfield Initiative, a program providing affordable housing, job training, and educational scholarships for struggling families. Eleanor sat in the front row, crying openly with pride. After the announcement, Clayton returned to Brookshire Academy for Nash's end-of-year celebration. Rosalind was there, her parents beside her, all three wearing proud smiles.
"You did this," Rosalind said, gesturing to the news coverage on someone's phone. "You changed everything." Clayton knelt to her level. This child who'd altered the trajectory of his life without even trying. "No, Rosalind, you did this. You taught me one simple lesson that changed my life forever, that the truest measure of who we are isn't what we keep, but what we give away. You showed me that kindness isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing we can be." Rosalind's smile could have lit the whole city. "My papa says every act of kindness is like dropping a stone in water. You can't see where all the ripples go, but you know they're spreading." "Your papa is a very wise man," Clayton said, "like his daughter." That evening, Clayton and Nash sat on their penthouse balcony, watching the city lights bloom like earthbound stars. Nash clutched his blue fabric star, the one Rosalind had made months ago, now worn soft from constant holding. "Daddy?" Nash's voice was small in the gathering dark. "Are we happy now?" Clayton pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of innocence and hope. "Yeah, buddy, I think we finally are." Because he'd learned, through the simple kindness of an 8-year-old girl who had nothing but gave everything, that wealth without heart was just loneliness dressed in expensive clothes, that power without compassion was just control masquerading as strength, and that the greatest legacy he could leave his son wasn't money in a trust fund, but the knowledge that every human being deserved dignity, kindness, and a chance to be seen. In the end, that was the lesson that changed everything. Not grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but the quiet, persistent truth that kindness, given freely and without expectation, could crack even the hardest heart and let the light pour in. And that light, once kindled, could illuminate the world. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.